Apparently, Napoleon said to his dresser, "Dress me slowly, I'm in a hurry." I am not going to listen to that advice. I'm going to try to go through this video on structuring a corporate model fairly quickly. So I'll probably make mistakes, and I should have gone more slowly. Now, I already have put a few notes into a web page that will be revised. But once you set up, here's kind of the setup I suggest for a model that we've already done in earlier videos. You set up you get the historic financial statements, and you have all the rough and difficult thing about getting the data in correctly. You compute ROIC to try to understand what's really going on in the company, and then you make your assumptions. The rest of these, up through valuation, calculating pre-tax cash flow is the next section we'll work on, and then depreciation, and then after-tax cash flow, which is perhaps in the depreciation section. We put all the non-operating sections of the model together, and then we start on financing. And when we make the financing, we connect the financing with the financial statements, in particular the cash flow statement. And then the process is really pretty easy. So this is kind of a boring video, just to let you know. Now, in this web page, I've not finished this. This is going to document everything we do, and it's going to have little screenshots, and I told you what not to do. I've collected some bad examples. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the case we were working on. This file will be on the web page, and there's a little page named Financial Model Structure. And the first thing we'll do is put pre-tax cash flow. Now, what I'm going to do, and then let's go down a few lines and put depreciation, operating taxes, and after-tax free cash flow. And then maybe I'll put another section for other non-operating items. And then finally, we'll put the cash and debt balances. And we put this before we go to the financial statements. For me, this is the big trick. And then when we go down to the financial statements, we'll have maybe I'll put it over here, a profit and loss account, and then some cash flow. And at the very end of this cash flow, there'll be a net cash flow. And this net cash flow will tie into the balance of either the cash or debt or both. That's the only kind of big connection. And then we'll have the balance sheet. Okay, and I'm keeping them all on the same line so we can make a nice little graph. And then finally, we'll have some valuation. Okay, I very much believe, I'm a very big believer in keeping, I'm just moving to relax just a little bit. I'm a big believer in keeping this on one page. I'm a one-pager. I had to take a psychological test on this. I don't know why. I hate it when you have to go through one page to the other page. You can't see the natural flow. These models should have a natural flow. I know I'm in a very small minority here, but what the hell? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep turning on and off the video, because I'm not going to have you watch me type in titles all the time. And the first thing I'm going to type in, I'm just going to get the revenues, the operating costs, EBITDA, working capital changes, and so forth from the assumptions. They're almost all computed already. Okay, I've set up some titles. So let's just go and collect our revenues. Now, if we did this nicely, we already have this in the assumptions page, and then we can go and collect the cost of goods sold and all the cash operating expenses. Okay, and I call this materials and other power, excuse me, and then we have the employee costs, which we computed in the assumptions with some power function, and then I kind of grouped all the other costs together. I didn't kind of do that, I did that. Okay, and once we have that, we can press alternate equal and get the total costs, and then we can get the EBITDA in kind of a nice direct method, and then we can get these capital expenditures. Whoops, I put it in the wrong line. And these, for me, are the absolutely crucial parts of making a model. Now, capital expenditures to depreciation, capital expenditures for evaluation, and we have the total capital expenditures up here. We didn't have any in the first year. That doesn't matter. Then for the working capital, we put in all our balances, and hopefully I computed these balances now. I might not have, but again, these were kind of the top lines. So you see how if you've set up the model carefully and uh, uh, done, I guess, entered all of the assumptions in kind of in these little rows above, you can get this. And then what we do here is we get the balance. So we start with the balance of the working capital, which is just the assets minus the liabilities. And then we take the change in the working capital, which is this year minus last year. Now, don't worry about this first year because that's a history year. We'll fix that in a minute. Okay, and then we can even do this with some other items, provisions, or things like warranties that you've not paid for yet. It's very much like an account payable, really. You're borrowing money essentially from the customers, I suppose. If you want to look at it that way, it's probably not a very good way to look at it. But you've put an operating expense that you haven't paid any cash for yet. So you put these provisions here, the balance, and then just like working capital, you can get the change in provisions, which is this year minus last year. And then we can just select all of these different items and shift control R. Okay, and that's how fast it is. And if you even would like to, if you've got the generic macros open, you can press shift control E on a couple of these key lines, maybe even capital expenditures, because they'll be used a lot in the model just in a little bit of time. Okay, so that's our first section. And then let's go to the depreciation section, and I'm going to add some lines. I'm going to make our depreciation using a net depreciation rate rather than a gross depreciation rate. That's a simpler kind of way to do it. And then we're going to compute our taxes, and we're going to get our after-tax cash flow. In fact, up here, I really should put perhaps, I think it's good to put pre-tax cash flow. One asshole in my class, God, he started yelling, "You shouldn't compute pre-tax." Who cares? Why you can compute pre-tax cash flow? It's EBITDA minus capex minus the change in working capital and minus the change in provisions. Okay, and then we can just deduct taxes from there, so we can kind of get an indication just that fast what's going on here. Look like we have some negative cash flow, and then we're project. Okay, I had to cheat and make a couple of assumption changes. That power, if you watch the prior video, that power function kind of gave a crazy number. So now I'm looking at the pre-tax cash flow, and we have different base case, high case, Is that very different than the base case? Yes. Okay. And cash flow isn't negative all the time, which it could be. Don't worry if it is. If you've got a really high growth company, that could be the case. So now we're going to do some of this depreciation. Now the key thing here is, okay, opening balance equals prior year closing balance, even for the very first one. Capital expenditures comes from the assumptions, just like, actually it doesn't come from the assumptions, it comes from right here, just like last time. Depreciation is going to come from the down below, which looks like it's going to give you a circular reference problem, but we're going to use an opening balance to prevent that. And now we have the big calculation. We put if it's the historic switch, then, with a comma, we go up and all the way to the balance sheet. This is why putting these things in different sheets would be so bad. If we just take the actual balance, if it's the historic switch. Otherwise, you take the opening balance plus the capex minus the depreciation. So this is almost, it's not almost, it's really more important than the other use of the historic switch before. So if we go forward, then we have the actual plant balance, and then suddenly we haven't got depreciation in here, but then it's suddenly computed. And this way, if you have a new balance sheet for 2019 and so forth, you can just put the new balance sheet in and you don't have to recreate the model. Now, when I computed the net plant depreciation rate, I made a little adjustment on this net plant depreciation rate. I didn't compute it for the very first year, and that's because I made it on the opening balance. And that means the depreciation expense is our opening balance times our net plant depreciation rate. Now, what you could do if you want on this one, let's just find our actual depreciation just for a minute. I'm a little bit nervous. I should have tested this one out before. I'm on the balance sheet here. I need to go to the profit and loss statement and find some depreciation here. And it looks like we're okay. Okay, of course, until we get to the end year. Now, since I made it on the opening balance, actually, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to do another use of the historic switch. If it's the historic switch, then we can take the actual depreciation. Oops, I went too far. Otherwise, we take that opening balance and multiply it through, okay? And then since I used the opening balance, that's the big trick, this depreciation expense is all okay. So we have a smooth little thing. Now, I go on and on and on about if you use the gross depreciation, you'd have to take the net rates. And if you use this net plant depreciation rate and you're growing at a different rate, it's really a distorted kind of thing to do, because if you grow at a slow rate, your average population is older. Think of, I don't know, some country that has a really slow birth rate versus a half high birth rate. The net life you have is much lower. That wasn't a very good analogy, but I maybe could have made it better if I thought about it a little more. So we can take our EBITDA now and take our depreciation expense and compute our EBIT. Oh, look, we have a negative number. And then we can find the tax rate assumption that we made up here. Hopefully that still works. And then we can get our taxes on our EBIT. That's the taxes you would pay if you had no financing. If this was a pure company where the whole company just consisted of these operations and no other stuff, no other income, no other investments, no nothing else. And then we can do something else. We can take the net plant balance up here, and then we have the working capital balance here, and then we have the provision balance up here, which should be a minus. And our invested capital should be the net plant plus the working capital minus the provisions. Now, it might not be exactly that. Okay, and then we can, right at this point, maybe the after-tax cash flow deserves a underline. It's still, oops, oh, did I do something really bad? I pressed Shift Control R instead of Shift Control E. You know, if you press Shift Control R, sometimes you can use the Shift Control S to undo it. You can't always. And then we have a invested capital, and we can get our EBIT that we already computed just right up here, and take that EBIT multiplied by 1 minus the tax rate, and then we get our NOPAT, okay, and it's going down, okay, and in a minute, what we could do is then take, of course, the NOPAT divided by the average of the opening invested capital and the closing. Don't worry about the first year, okay, and then we can uh, kind of evaluate our assumptions and to see if we have something reasonable. And it's going down, so I'd suggest we have to take a little bit of a look at some of our assumptions. And that's where we can stop. And that wasn't so hard right there. That's how clear it kind of is. Now, after this, we'll add some non-operating income and start putting our financing in. But I'm going to pause this video and put the titles in and see what really happened to the ROIC. Okay, let's put in the investment balance. Now, what I did was in the meantime, when I paused the video, I adjusted the other expenses, and we have in the base case kind of a 8% return. Let's see what we have in the low case. About a 5% return, and in the high case, 11 going up higher return. So we'll work with that for now. So this filling in this. Now the big issue with this is this investment balance. It's the biggest item they had on the balance sheet, and a lot of these subsidiaries seem to be related to their own core business, but then they show the returns on these in other income, and a lot of these are dividends, and there's a lot of mixed up stuff that didn't describe that very well. But let's just put our assumption here. So I put a 5% growth in the investment balance, and then we can put the average just like we do all the time. Okay, I wish they didn't have the average Deves thing. Oh, who cares about that? And then we'll get the return on the average investments that we put in the assumptions. And I guess, when I do these things, I of course learn myself, but setting up the assumptions nicely is absolutely crucial, isn't it? So you can just link all these things in. And as I'm saying this, I can't find my assumption I'm looking for, and I hope that the assumptions should be in the same order as we're making the model. That was my other point. Then I'm going to multiply this, but I'm going to do the old thing. I'm going to do the if it's the historic switch just again to remind you how to do that. If it's the historic switch, let's go all the way up to our profit and loss statement and find all those other the other income. Otherwise, we'll just do our calculation. We'll take the average balance and multiply it by the income. If you are modeling a bank or a financial institution, that seems to be about all you do. You model the balance on the loans and all that. I'm looking for things to say while I'm doing this boring crap. Okay, that's it. Now let's get to the cash balances. Now, when you get to the cash balances, I'm going to do it fairly simply at first. I'm going to kind of plop, say you either have debt or cash, an either or kind of thing. And then we'll put in minimum cash balances and all that kind of at the end of this video. So I'm going to pause it and put our titles in again. Okay, I think we're just about ready to finish it up. So we'll put in some cash balance and some debt balance, at least for the historic periods. And then to make it very simple, we'll just combine the cash and the debt together. It's kind of like net debt in reverse. We'll make an opening and closing balance. The closing balance will be the net amount in the historic period. Okay. And in the very first period, we have cash minus debt. So we have a negative amount, which means we have more debt than cash. Duh. And then that's the amount we'll put in. And then we'll make, for the historic period, we'll just use these balances. But for the future period, we'll just say, okay, if it's the cash balance is positive, we'll just call it all cash, and we'll just bring all the debt down to zero or all the cash down to zero. That's not realistic, but it's a place to start. And then we can put our interest rate, and I'm going to leave one interest rate here, and I'll call it interest expense or interest income. This is good that I didn't do this. And then we'll just walk through a profit and loss. We've got the revenues, cost, EBITDA. We've got all of this. And we just computed the interest income and interest expense. By the way, this will be on the opening balance to avoid a circular reference. And then we have some other income just from above here. And then we just kind of fill everything in. The only thing down here is maybe we'll put a tax rate and then compute the taxes. I'm going to leave the taxes negative for now, and then we'll come and kind of clean this up and put carry forward in. And then in the assumptions, at the very end of the assumptions, there is a payout ratio. Okay, right here. All right, and once we have the net income, we can say, okay, let's compute the dividends as a function of the payout ratio. And then we'll go to the cash flow statement. And in the cash flow statement, we'll start with EBITDA, so that's taxes, working capital changes, and get operating cash flow. Take away all the capital expenditures, our investment, our other increased investments, and then get another subtotal, and then put over all our financing things in here, including the other income I put below the line now. Do you see that? We can finally get our net cash flow, and then we'll go to the balance sheet. So let's just fill this in. Okay, so our opening balance equals our prior period closing balance. And the reason I did this whole thing was so that you can go all the way down and do something with this net cash flow. That's the whole key to getting all these statements put together. And then if the cash flow is positive, we just add it. Okay. And then Now, if it's, I've got to adjust this, of course. I said, of course, if it's the historic period, well, we're not going to, we'll just put the actual amount in. And that's another way that the whole model will work. It will all work. And if you have to add another historic year in and all that, uh, it will be all automatic. Now, if this is true, then let's just take the actual cash balance. Otherwise, let's take the maximum of this or zero. That means maximum just says if it's positive, take it. And that means as soon as it's the historic period, we're going to split it either into debt or to cash. If it's a positive number, we're going to call it all cash. If it's a negative number, so we'll put if the historic period, then we'll take the actual debt balance, and then we'll put a maximum of a minus this or zero. Now it doesn't, right now it just gives you the actual debt balance. And then I hope I put an interest rate in here. I think I did. Here's all of our assumptions. Here are all of our assumptions. And I put an interest rate in here. And then I'll say, we'll just multiply the opening balance by the interest rate. Now, I think on this one, it's probably a very good idea to just plop in, if it's the historic period, let's go up and take the actual interest. And we had that here. So I just made the formula and then adjusted it. And no, the same thing. If it's the historic period, well, we didn't have any interest income. Otherwise, take the opening balance and multiply it by the, I'm going to multiply it by the last year cash balance, and I'm going to do this too. So it should be by the last year debt balance. This is to avoid the circular reference, all right? And then I'll copy these across. Now, the only thing we don't have, of course, is the cash balance. So that right now we have a lot more debt than cash and all of that. Ugh, okay, I should have said something more profound, but okay. And then let's go and get our revenues from up here. This might be too tedious unless I can go a little bit more quickly. Okay, I should have maybe done our colors already, and then let's get all of our operating costs. Okay, and then we've got a subtotal, and that's the only thing basically we have to do. And then we have it, remember we had a section of the model for our depreciation. Let's get our depreciation expense, and then we have our EBT. We've already kind of computed that. Now we can go up and get our interest expense that we just had the very last section here. And I hope you get the idea that you should not do these kind of things, and don't make the profit and loss at the beginning. Oh my God, I had this guy. After my whole class, he started arguing with me and said, "Oh, you got to put the profit and loss, the balance sheet at the beginning, the projected balance sheet. Oh, that's the worst practice ever." It got me off track. Just a minute, I'm looking for the other income. Okay. All right, and then we had a little thing for the extraordinary income, I think, in the up here. That's just going to make sure everything kind of works, and then we can take our EBITDA minus our interest plus our interest income plus the other income plus, I hope, the extraordinary, and then we get our kind of taxes, and then we'll re-put the tax rate in. Why don't I put it here, and then we can take, if this works, we'll do that. Although, if you have a little mistake, it's going to be a pain. So I'm going to put, if it's the actual, let's just go up and take the actual taxes. So if it's the historic year. Let's just go and get the actual tax. Otherwise, let's go and multiply the tax rate by the EBT and leave it negative for a while. And finally, you can get the earnings. All right, and then we can go down now. I also put a assumption about a payout ratio. Okay, that was kind of the last assumption here. And then we can take the earnings times the payout ratio. Now you could do, I think I'm going to do the same thing. If it's the historic switch, I hope you are still understanding that without this historic switch, this would have taken you ages, much longer. I hope you can see that. And it would be so sad for me if after a class you don't use the historic switch. That would really be a sad thing. Okay, and we have the equity dividend here. Okay, so I'm just putting the actual dividends here, and then we can take the EBITDA, take away the taxes. Now this, if you have deferred taxes, there would have to be an adjustment here. Upstairs we had the working capital changes, I hope. Here, that was one of our big items. And then we have the changes in provisions. Now we have to be a little bit careful here because that's like a accounts receivable. So if this is going up, which it is, that's a positive change in cash flow. So I think we're okay. So we have EBITDA minus the taxes minus the working capital plus the change in provisions. And then we can go up and get our capital expenditures. And I think I put a line item. Don't worry about that first line. It doesn't matter really because we put all of the other stuff in. Now I think I didn't complete one little thing here. I didn't put the increase in our investments. So this would be the current level of investments, not the average balance, the minus the prior level. Okay, that's how much we're spending on all these investments we have. Okay, I'm going to repeat myself. Whether that should be part of free cash flow in the core operations or not is an issue. Okay, and then we take our operating cash flow minus these two, and is this not boring? And then we go into all of our below the line kind of stuff, which is first our interest expense, which comes from here. And I hope you see that this is just, we're in the mode of just attaching things, and then we have our other income. Now we should have hopefully identified just about everything we have, everything that's on the income statement and the balance sheet, and there's dividends between. So our net cash flow is our operating cash flow, and I think if it says less, you probably put a minus. And if it says less, you put a minus, and I should have started with cash flow before financing, minus the interest, plus the other income, plus the interest income minus the dividends. Okay, so that's our cash flow, meaning that we have to go and get some cash flow somewhere, and that's the line that attaches to the whole kind of thing all the way at the top. Okay, and then I strongly believe in underlining, but maybe that's just a kind of bullshit, but whatever. And then we'll now let's just make sure our balance sheet balances, because I've been telling you many times that there is simply no better feeling in the whole world, no better, whatever, ecstasy than having your balance sheet balance. Okay, and we'll put it in all the balance sheet items with one big exceptions with the equity balance should uh, already be in the model. Okay, so I'm going to switch the video off one more time and we'll put in the balance sheet. Okay, I'm going to put the balance sheet in. I'm nervous about this because I haven't tried it out yet. And what we're going to do also is we're going to check that when we made our total income here, I don't think it's right. And then we'll check to make sure that that's correct. It made sure we haven't put any minuses and pluses and we haven't forgotten any items. So we put our historic assets in here and then a check. And we can do the same thing with down here. When we go to our liabilities, we'll do the same thing. Historic liabilities and capital and check. Okay. And then we'll finally get a difference and get our ultimate ecstasy check, which is the the check of both the historic and projected balance sheet. Okay, and then now let's start with our cash balance. So we just go upstairs, and this is the idea is you just start finding the numbers. Our debtors, sundry debtors, that would be, remember, we're in the assumptions section. We put the balances in. So we have those balances. For the inventories, it's the same thing. Okay, and then we can press alternate equal to get a subtotal, okay? And then we'll get our net plant balance. You remember we had that somewhere upstairs. And whenever, well, I was going to say whenever we have these balances, we did this historic check, but that's not exactly right. And then we put our investment balance up here. Okay, and then our total assets, we can just select this like this and press alternate equal. Okay, and now, if this doesn't work, which it probably won't, well, I can't even do this because this was in this other format. Our actual balance was this plus the investments plus the current assets plus the cash somewhere. Oh, excuse me, plus the loans plus the, where did I put the loans? F26 plus F27 plus, I hope I can find the cash somewhere. Where was the cash? Did I? Oh, it's already in there, so. Whew. That is kind of good news. Okay. And what we can do is we can just make this a little bit of a true. Okay, equals 0. Whoa, what an idiot. Okay. And let's put now for the liabilities and capital. I told you the one account we don't have is the balance of the equity. So the reason we can't do that yet is because that comes from the balance sheet and the cash flow and the income statement. Now, I didn't put any new investments in, but I put the earnings in, and I put the dividends in, which is kind of, notice it's kind of almost the last line of all those. We can add the equity, add the income, less the dividends, and that gives us our balance of the equity. Now, I did something a little bit bad, and that's I should have put an if statement, and if it's the historic period, then we don't use the we use the actual balance of the net worth. So I did that badly. Excuse me for that. Okay, and then we go and get our balance of the provisions, the warranties you have, and all of that stuff. And here it is. And then we get our debt balance, and that debt balance, again, we could get much more sophisticated here, but this is kind of a way to start. And then I put my equity balance that we just got, and we press alternate equal, and it doesn't work. And so we could go up and try to get all of our items here. So we had the net worth plus the secured loans plus the current liabilities plus the provisions, I think. And there are balance sheets balancing, and then we have a difference. Okay, and I have to go and find that. And where? Oh, I didn't put the current liabilities in. Okay, well, see, it was good. It told me what I did wrong, and then I'm going to have to redo the alternate equal. Okay, I'm a little flustered now. But not so flustered, a tiny bit relaxed, because I realized that it's going to work. Okay, so let's put alternate equal again, and then we can compare this. Oops, and make it equal to 0. So we have kind of two checks. Now the ultimate check is whether this minus this is going to be equal to 0. Oh, ooh, it's a tiny, tiny bit different. So what we better do is when we check it, put a round, and this one was a pretty bad one. I'll put comma 0 equal 0. Okay? And let's select this whole thing and press Shift Control R. Okay. Uh-oh. And, well, we should have put a round here, I guess, as well. And then it's supposed to be, ooh, no, we got a little bit of a false here. No, this is just rounding, excuse me. And the liabilities we have a problem with. Okay. And I think rather than waste your time going through the model, now I'm going to go and turn the video off, because I'll be swearing so much when I can't find this. Now we can do the same sort of thing on the profit and loss statement. We can go upstairs and get the reported net profit. This doesn't look that bad. Well, it's a little bit. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a difference here, because the art of this is or the medicine, it's like you're a doctor or something, is to start, and I don't know, maybe I put round, fine, of this comma 0 equals 0, so maybe that's close enough. We have to decide what the round statement. It wasn't so bad, was it? We have to try to figure it out. I bet it's something with this. Maybe it's this extraordinary that I put in wrong. That doesn't look right. And why is this one a little bit bigger? We'll go and see. Perhaps when you add up all the accounts in the history, it doesn't work perfectly. That could be a reason. Okay, I'm going to switch off the video, and then we'll talk about making this a little more sophisticated. Okay, so it was not that bad to do. I had taken an incorrect line for the historic check, and I had not included a couple of things for the change in the stocks for the in the profit and loss statement. And now the good news is it's kind of all balancing. One little exception here was that the balance sheet actually didn't balance, but I can't do anything about that really. The balance sheet didn't balance in the historic numbers that we received. So the great news is that this happened. Now there's one little thing. I think this is the last. I'm gonna talk about two remaining issues here. I'm gonna leave I'm not gonna put in the net operating loss right now, because if we put in, I know I'm kind of cheating, but if we put in a low case, I put the low case for the margin and a low case for the investments, we still have a positive taxable income. Perhaps, screw it. I will talk about the net operating loss. That's crap. That's a stupid excuse to give you not to do it. And then, if you go down to the balance sheet here, this is kind of silly. We have the cash balance going to zero. Well, you might have some minimum cash requirements. So I'm going to make another assumption. I'm going to do this one reasonably slowly. Okay. And we'll, for our last assumption, let's put the cash balance here, which I have. Okay, so, excuse me. Let's take this cash balance and compare that to the revenues. And then we'll put our cash, I'm going to put our minimum cash as percent of revenues. Okay, so we'll just put this in and let's see what we get. We have to go upstairs a little to get the revenues. There we go. And we'll take the cash divided by the revenues, 8% about. It goes to 4, and then we can, of course, take this thing that we did before to get our little averages, and it looks like the last year and the average was pretty similar, so I'm going to put 5.8%, and of course what I have to do in these assumptions is make a little if statement and click on the true, and then click on the last one. Okay, so here we have our minimum cash balance. Now we have to do something with this. If I screw up here, well, I can of course edit the video, can't I? This is a good news about these videos. When I make really stupid mistakes, I can turn them off. So we have a cash balance here, and then let's first put just the minimum cash percent maybe of that, and get our assumption. Okay. I seem to be going a little bit slowly on these. and then we'll put our required cash balance. That's going to be simply the revenues up here multiplied by our percent. Now, when we have our cash balance, we said maximum of 0. Well, it's not really the maximum of 0 up here. It's the maximum of, it can never be less than the minimum cash balance. So it seems that all we have to do is change this number. Okay. And then we, I think I didn't copy it to the right. And then we have our cash balance, but we're not at all finished. If we used some of the money for cash, that means we'll have to get more debt. So we need to adjust this one as well. So when it's negative, we switch it to the positive. But when it's negative, we have to add additional amounts of debt. So we'll make it plus this required cash balance. Okay, and then the debt, unlike the cash, the debt can go to 0. So now here's why it's nice to have the balance sheet done. Okay, so we just basically took this cash flow, and let's kind of see what we did in the first projected period. In the first projected period, it's a negative number, so we wanted to keep this cash flow on the balance sheet. And so we said, okay, well, let's take the total closing balance of this one. Let's just do a little calculation. This is the total amount of both cash and debt. So we need additional amounts of debt. So if I can put a minus of the cash on this one. I didn't get it right. Let's see it's wrong. I made a mistake. I made a mistake on purpose. Well, not really. Okay, and let's go and fix this. 78 was the incorrect amount. Well, I turned the video off, and all I forgot to do was copy it to the right. So this actually was a correct calculation. Let's review it again. It says take the maximum of the minus number, but then add back the amount of debt. And you can do whatever you want, but I think doing it in these two steps, doing it in a very simple way and then a more complicated way. Now, it's very possible you also have some fixed interest rate debt issues. And if you have some fixed interest rate debt issues, you would just add them up here. You just put you just add another account for the fixed interest rate debt issues. This cash flow would have to be after you repay the fixed debt interest rate issues and after you pay the interest and the principal on those fixed interest rate issues. And then the calculation would be essentially the same. And the final point is that there is if we use instead of the beginning balance here, we use the beginning balance right here. So instead of using the beginning balance for both of these, if we used the average balance, we would have a circular reference. And I deal with that in a different video. Okay? Now, let's talk about the next issue I wanted to address, and I'm getting close to being finished. Not exactly. For the taxes, we have this EBIT, and if this is a negative number, so let's make a really bad case. So let's put our straight a point, right? Okay, and then we'll now have some negative earnings, and they remain negative. Okay, it would be kind of neat if they went positive. So what we do is put our opening NOL balance here. And the reason I really didn't want to do this is because it's so boring. And then we add the tax loss, taxable loss, and then we need another 2 lines, and then we put less the NOL used, and then we have a closing NOL balance, and finally an adjusted EBT. Now you could also put some deferred taxes in here for this, but I'm going to discuss that whole business on a different video when I talk about the bridge between enterprise value and equity value. Now this is really simple. We put a maximum of a minus of this or 0. So in a way, it's a good time to do this. We were using maximum and minimum. And then the next one's really, so that's if you have a taxable loss, if you have a taxable loss, you say, okay, we're going to plop that into the carry forward. And let's put the closing balance here first. That's plus the taxable loss, but then we're going to have to subtract how much we used. And now our earnings before tax are going to be the minus of this, plus any amount we have to defer, minus the amount we're going to use later on. And so we can have this. Now when we do this, okay, what happens is, it never gets used. But of course, it would actually get used pretty quickly, because then once the taxable income is positive, so we put maximum or 0, okay, we could use it then. Okay, but that doesn't work because we used way too much. So we have to cap the amount we use. And whenever we cap the amount we use, we put a minimum, and then you go to the opening balance. That's always kind of the rule with the minimum plus the maximum. Okay, so we didn't use any, and then we had a big taxable loss, and unfortunately we could never use it. Let's just switch it maybe down to be not quite so extreme. Let's go to, how about something like this? I should have put this perhaps on the thing. Oh, good. And then here's what happened. We had a taxable loss, but then it turns positive, so we used some of the taxable loss. And then we have the taxes here are not ever negative. The taxes, we have to leave this here for the history, but the taxes are the tax rate multiplied by the adjusted EBT, only for the prospective period. Okay, so we have that. Now the final thing I think we should do is I made this assumptions graph, and right now it's kind of silly. I'm just going to, instead of the custom case, put it back to the base case. Okay, and we might want to, on this graph, let's make another page of it, and I want to, whenever I present one of these graphs, I think it's a really good idea to show what the return on invested capital is. So I'll put this kind of before the sheet, so we'll have another assumptions graph too. I guess I'll leave it like that. And we can almost do the same thing. This time I'm going to put I'll just put ROIC, and perhaps I'll just put the row number for it. I'm kind of thinking out loud on this one, which is really bad. And you recall we were able to get the ROIC from this row 287. So all I'm going to do is put an index just so we practice this. And you go back to the model and go to our assumptions graph and use a row number in case this row number got changed or something. And then we have our ROIC, and then we'll make the history and the forecast as well. Okay, and I'm not sure how this will look, but let's try it. So if it's the historic switch, then you just take the number, and this one, if it's the historic switch, then put not, if it's not the historic switch, okay, then take the number, okay, and then we have the two kind of going across, and you know what, let's do this, let's just put our I'm gonna call this our ROIC history in this ROIC forecast, and we'll put the raw materials as a percentage, and we can put a little double inverted comma here and put history and forecast, and then let's so here were our numbers, and now let's delete this other beautiful graph we made, and now we can kind of keep our we better put a little year thing here. Okay. Oh, did I not do this correctly? Excuse me. Stupid thing. Excuse me for doing that. I want to finish this video so badly to be finished with this boring stuff. Okay. And let's press alternate F1 and see kind of what it looks like. I would think maybe now we can change the different chart types, and I think we should make the this is not the right one to do. I want to put select data, I suppose. Oh, come on, how'd you change this? Is I'm just I want to change the series chart type. Why don't I just look at that one? Excuse me. Okay, and the RIC history, let's make that a line, and let's make the other one a line, and let's see what happens. So it kind of didn't look so good, but well, okay. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna leave it, and let's put this somewhere else, and make a nice graph kind of be finished. So we can see maybe why what I'm really interested in doing is seeing what was the driver of that ROIC being so high, and we can start, well, let's just kind of go up the we need to put these on the second scale. I see. Okay. Didn't work so well. Well, whatever. Okay. Maybe that wasn't a great idea, but The employee cost started to go up and we have it coming down. Is that a reasonable assumption? Is that what caused the ROIC to go up? Other expenses were going up. Maybe we were a little aggressive on the other expenses because we had them coming down, and now we can, I think, look at this stuff. I think it's okay. This was we need a title on this. This was the capital expenditures. That wasn't it. Inventories too. This was just the historic amount of the inventories. Maybe that's what happened. You know, I think maybe those operating costs were really what was causing it. Let's go all the way back up to the revenues. Okay. And try to understand some history. I think we're being a lot more historian than anything else. Well, that didn't cause it either, but I think that's enough. So the next step in our video will be to start our valuation analysis. And that's that.